The sun sank low over the western horizon, painting the prairie sky in shades of molten gold and crimson. Dust hung in the air above the small town of Willow Creek, stirred by wagon wheels and boots that had scuffed the main street all day. It should have been a quiet evening, the sort where families gathered on porches and men told stories outside the saloon. But instead, every eye seemed fixed on one figure walking quickly through the street. Clara Monroe. Her shoulders were squared, her chin lifted higher than she felt, but every step was heavy with shame. She could feel the whispers before she heard them. The townsfolk leaning close to mutter words like ruined and disgrace. No one spoke her name with kindness anymore. She hadn't done what they accused her of. But truth had little value in a town where power belonged to the richest man's son. Clara's crime was simple. She had said no. She had pushed away Charles Grady, the arrogant heir to the largest ranch in 3 counties. He didn't take rejection kindly. By the next morning, stories spread like wildfire. Stories that Clara had invited him, enticed him, behaved without decency. She had been branded not with iron but with the venom of lies. And in Willow Creek, once a woman was branded, she might as well be cast into the desert to fend for herself. Clara clutched her shawl tighter, though the evening was warm. She wanted to disappear, to fold into herself until no one could see her. A woman who had once been known for her bright laugh and her quick hands at the seamstress. Shop now walked as though every glance was a knife. At the corner of the street, men lounged outside the saloon. They fell silent as she passed. One of them spat into the dirt, another let out a low chuckle. Clara's steps faltered, but she pressed on. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. From the shadows near the hitching post, another figure watched. He was taller than most, broad-shouldered beneath his worn leather vest. His hat was pulled low, but his eyes missed nothing. Caleb Hart had spent years on cattle drives, weathering storms, dust, and long nights under endless skies. He'd seen cruelty on the frontier before, but something in Clara's face, the quiet strength beneath her humiliation, struck him deeper than he expected. Caleb shifted, the leather of his holster creaking as he stepped away from the shadows. When Clara reached the mercantile, a group of women standing at the steps turned their backs to her. The gesture was sharp, deliberate. Clara's hand trembled on the door handle, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might crumble right there. But she didn't. She pushed the door open and went inside. Caleb drew a breath, steady and deep. He'd been a man who minded his own business. Trouble was easy to find in a town like Willow Creek, and he had no use for it. But this was different. The morning sun spilled over the Hart Ranch, gilding the rolling pastures in soft light. Clara stood on the porch, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, watching the horses move through the corral. It had been a week since Caleb had led her away from town, his presence like a shield against the cutting stares and whispers. Out here, away from Willow Creek's wagging tongues, the silence was different, not heavy with judgment, but alive with the hum of cicadas and the soft whicker of cattle. Still, silence could be its own kind of weight. Clara's heart ached with the memory of what she had lost. Her shop, her friends, her place in the community. Even here, safe on Caleb's land, she felt like a woman unmoored. She had been cast aside, and though Caleb's kindness steadied her, she wondered how long even a man like him could carry the burden of a ruined name. "Coffee?" His voice came from behind her, deep and steady. She turned. Caleb stood in the doorway, 2 steaming mugs in hand. The morning light caught the rough lines of his face, the streaks of dust across his shirt, and the quiet determination in his eyes. Clara accepted the mug, her fingers brushing his. A small comfort bloomed in her chest. Caleb didn't flinch when he touched her. Didn't look at her as though she carried a stain. He looked at her as though she were just Clara, the woman she had been before the lies. "You don't have to keep me here," she murmured, staring into the coffee. "People will talk. They'll say worse things than before." Caleb leaned against the post, crossing his arms. "Let 'em talk." His gaze was fixed on the horizon, but there was fire beneath his calm tone. "I don't live my life by their say-so, and neither should you." Her throat tightened. No one had ever spoken for her like that. Not her neighbors, not even her family who had chosen silence over support. Yet Caleb, a man who owed her nothing, stood against the tide as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The days that followed unfolded slowly. Like pages in a story Clara never expected to live. She helped mend fences, learned to gather eggs from the hens, and rode with Caleb across the wide fields. At night, they sat by the fire, the crackle of flames filling the spaces where words were too heavy to place. She found herself laughing again, sometimes catching Caleb's rare smile in return. It startled her. How quickly the ranch began to feel like a place where she could breathe. But shadows never stayed. Far in Willow Creek, Charles, Grady had not forgotten his insult. Word reached Clara through the whispers of a passing peddler. Charles had vowed to ruin Caleb for siding with her. Already, he was using his father's influence to pressure the town council, threatening to claim the Hart Ranch under false debts. Fear coiled in Clara's stomach. When she told Caleb, "He'll take everything from you," she said, her voice breaking. "This is because of me. If I just left—" Caleb silenced her with a single, steady look. "Don't you dare think that. Charles Grady's been looking for a fight with me since the first time he saw me ride into town. You didn't bring this trouble, but I'll finish it." The showdown came faster than either of them expected. It was a Saturday afternoon when Willow Creek gathered in the town square. The air buzzed with tension. Charles Grady stood tall in the center, his fine coat spotless, his smirk curling with confidence. Behind him, his father's men formed a wall of silent threat. And before the entire town, Charles declared Caleb a thief, a man living on borrowed land that rightfully belonged to the Grady family. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her heart pounding. She knew the truth didn't matter here, not with Charles twisting every word, not with the townsfolk eager to see her dragged lower. Shame threatened to choke her again. Then Caleb stepped forward. He stood tall, his hat shadowing his eyes, but his voice carried clear as a bell. "You want to talk about thieves, Charles? You're the one who stole this woman's honor with lies." He pointed toward Clara, his hand steady. "And I'll tell you all plain, she's the only woman I need. If you think I'll let your poison take her down, or take what I built with my own hands, you'll find out I stand ready to fight." The crowd gasped. For the first time, someone had spoken the truth aloud. Eyes turned to Clara, waiting, weighing. She felt the old fear rise up, but Caleb's words burned brighter. She stepped forward too, her voice trembling but strong. "I am not ruined," she said. "I was never what you claimed me to be. And if you all choose to believe lies, then you are the ones bound by them, not me." The silence that followed was heavier than any whisper. Even Charles faltered, his smirk fading as the strength of their defiance struck him. That night, the tide in Willow Creek began to shift. Not all hearts changed, but some did. And for Clara, the brand of shame she had carried so long seemed to fall away, replaced by something new, hope. As the stars rose over the prairie, Caleb and Clara stood side by side at the edge of town. He reached for her hand, rough and steady. She laced her fingers with his, and for the first time in months she felt whole again. Whatever battles lay ahead, she knew the truth. She had not been cast aside, she had been chosen. The morning air on Caleb Hart's ranch was crisp, carrying the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. Clara woke to the faint crow of a rooster and the steady rhythm of hooves from the pasture. For a moment, she lay still listening, unsure if this quiet place was real or only another fragile dream. It had been days since Caleb had led her away from Willow Creek, but the memory of sharp whispers and cold stares still lingered like bruises across her spirit. She rose from the small bed Caleb had given her in the spare room of his ranch house. The walls were plain, but the quilt over her was warm, hand-stitched with fading blue patterns. She ran her hand over it, feeling the uneven seams, and thought of the women who must have stitched it long ago. Perhaps they too had carried scars the world never saw. When she stepped outside, the land spread before her like an endless canvas. The prairie grasses bent under the touch of a morning breeze, glimmering in the light of the rising sun. Horses moved slowly in the corral, their dark shapes outlined in gold. Clara drew her shawl around her shoulders, breathing deeply. Out here, there were no accusing eyes, no cruel laughter, only silence. "Coffee?" She startled at the voice and turned. Caleb stood in the doorway, his broad frame filling it. He held 2 tin mugs, steam rising from both. His shirt was already dusted with earth from morning chores, and his hat sat low over his brow. Clara accepted the mug, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, leaning against the porch post, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Sleep all right?" She hesitated before answering. "Better than I expected." He didn't press. That was one of the things she had noticed about him. Caleb had a way of giving space without making it feel like distance. He didn't prod into her pain, didn't demand explanations. He simply stood near like a mountain that didn't need to prove its strength. Clara sipped the coffee, its bitterness sharp on her tongue. "You don't have to keep me here," she said quietly. "People will talk. They'll say worse things than before." "Let 'em talk," Caleb replied, his voice steady. "I don't live for their say-so." "Neither should you." The words landed in her chest with more weight than she wanted to admit. All her life she had measured herself by others. By the seamstress customers who praised her stitches. By neighbors who valued propriety above kindness. By a town that could brand a woman with ruin at the whim of a spoiled man. But Caleb's eyes held none of that judgment. He looked at her as though she were simply Clara, no more, no less. That morning marked the beginning of a new rhythm. Clara learned to gather eggs from the hens, though she shrieked the first time one pecked her hand. Caleb had laughed, not unkindly, and showed her how to move steady, not skittish. By afternoon she was laughing too. She mended one of his shirts by lamplight, her needle moving in careful stitches while he sat nearby, carving a piece of wood into the rough shape of a horse. Days bled into one another with a quiet familiarity. At night they sat by the fire, the crackle of flames filling the spaces where words might have been too heavy. She found herself watching his hands, the way they moved with surety, whether holding reins, tools, or even a simple mug. Those same hands had shielded her in town, and some part of her, fragile but alive, wanted to trust them again. But shadows had long arms, and Willow Creek was not as far behind them as Clara wished. Word arrived one evening by way of a traveling peddler. He carried bolts of cloth, sacks of sugar, and news heavier than any goods. Over supper, he leaned across the table and lowered his voice. "Charles Grady's been stirring trouble," he said. "Says Hart's ranch sits on land that ain't his by rights. Claims debts unpaid, paperwork missing. Whole council's got Grady's coin jingling in their pockets." Clara's stomach twisted. Her hands tightened on her lap and her breath came sharp. "Because of me," she murmured. "This is happening because of me." Caleb set his fork down, his jaw tightening. "Don't start that." She looked up, eyes wide, brimming. "If I had just left—" "Don't." His voice cut through her words like a blade. But it wasn't unkind. It was firm, steady. "Charles Grady's been gunning for me since the day I set foot in this town. You didn't bring this trouble, Clara, but I'll sure as hell finish it." The conviction in his voice should have comforted her, but it only made her heart race faster. She knew Charles Grady's cruelty. She had felt it when his lies spread like wildfire, scorching her reputation beyond recognition. Now, with Caleb standing in his way, she feared the flames would burn hotter than ever. The dust hadn't fully settled in Willow Creek after Caleb's stand against Charles Grady, though the townsfolk had begun to see Clara differently. No longer a ruined outcast, but a woman of courage. Shadows still lingered at the edges of peace. Charles was humiliated, but humiliation in a man like him often bred vengeance, and the frontier had a way of unearthing old grudges, sometimes in the form of a bullet. Clara, now working the ranch alongside Caleb, finally felt a rhythm of life return. She laughed again, her hands strong from chores, her heart steadier in Caleb's presence. Their bond grew with every passing day, a quiet certainty beneath the endless sky. Yet in the back of her mind she knew peace was fragile. Every time she caught Caleb scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes, she felt it too. The real storm arrived not from Willow Creek, but from the road beyond. A gang of riders hired by Charles with his father's money swept into the outskirts of the ranch one night. Their torches lit the dark, their shouts carried through the fields. They wanted land, blood, and revenge. What followed would test not only Caleb's strength, but Clara's courage. For the first time she would have to fight, not just for her name or her dignity, but for her very life beside the man who had stood for her when no one else would. The town, once willing to brand her ruined, would watch again. This time, they would see whether love and truth could withstand the fire of violence, and Clara herself would learn that she was not only the woman Caleb needed, she was a woman strong enough to claim her own destiny. No matter what ghost from the past rode against her, the Hart Ranch smoldered with the scars of fire. Though the gang Charles Grady had hired had been driven back, the land bore the mark of their torches, charred fence posts, blackened pasture, and the lingering smell of smoke in the night air. Caleb and Clara fought side by side to protect what they could, but the message was clear. Charles would not stop until everything they loved was ash. For Clara, the attack sparked a fire of her own. No longer would she cower behind Caleb's protection, fearing the whispers of the town or the lies of men with power. If she was to stand with him, truly stand, she would need to rise as more than the woman once cast aside. Together they began to rebuild. Each swing of the hammer, each board mended, drew them closer, yet danger still hung thick. Caleb knew Charles would come again, perhaps not with torches this time, but with bullets. Word spread fast across Willow Creek. Some folks who had once turned their backs on Clara now began to murmur differently. They had seen her courage in the square, heard the truth from her lips, and now witnessed her laboring shoulder to shoulder with Caleb, but others still clung to Grady influence, whispering that Hart and Monroe were fools who would bring ruin upon themselves and anyone near them. The turning point came when Charles himself returned to town, no longer content to send men in his stead. With him rode professional guns, hired killers who carried the weight of blood on their hands. Their presence was a promise. Willow Creek would soon be bathed in dust and blood. In the face of this threat, Caleb prepared for a showdown he knew might be his last. But Clara refused to be left behind. "You said I wasn't ruined," she told him, eyes bright with defiance. "Then don't treat me like I'm breakable now. If you're to fight, then I'll fight too. Not for honor, not for whispers, but for us." And so Chapter 4 builds toward a looming confrontation where Clara and Caleb must unite not just as lovers, but as partners forged in fire, ready to face the storm Charles Grady has unleashed. The tension in Willow Creek was thick enough to choke a man. Word of Charles Grady's hired killers spread through the town like prairie fire, leaving doors bolted and curtains drawn. No one wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Yet everyone knew the streets would soon run red with dust and blood. Caleb Hart rode into town at dawn, his hat low, his revolver heavy at his side. Clara rode with him, her back straight, her resolve unshaken. No amount of pleading had convinced her to stay behind. This was not only Caleb's fight. It was hers too. She would not return to the shadows of silence, not after she had clawed her way into the light. They dismounted in front of the saloon where Charles waited, his fine clothes untouched by dirt, his smirk sharper than a knife. Around him lounged the hired guns, cold-eyed men, whose hands hovered near their holsters. The townsfolk gathered at the edges, silent witnesses to the trial about to unfold. "Look at you," Charles drawled, his voice carrying across the street. "The ruined girl and the dirt-poor cowboy. Willow Creek deserves better than the likes of you." Clara's chin lifted. "What Willow Creek deserves is the truth," she said, her voice steady. "And the truth is you tried to break me because I said no. You failed." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling through them. For once Clara's words were not drowned by gossip. They rang out clear, undeniable. Caleb stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "This ends today, Charles. No more lies. No more fires. No more running men out of town because they don't bow to you." The street went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. In the blink of an eye, hands flew to holsters. The crack of gunfire split the morning. Dust exploded from the ground as bullets struck. Caleb moved with the speed of a man who'd faced death before, his revolver flashing in the sun. Clara ducked for cover, heart pounding. But when one of the hired guns broke for her, she seized a fallen rifle and fired, the recoil nearly knocking her down. Her shot struck true. When the dust cleared, Charles Grady lay in the dirt. His smirk finally gone, his hired guns scattered or dead. The town, silent for so long, erupted with shouts, not of condemnation but of astonishment. They had witnessed truth, courage, and love standing unbroken against power. Caleb holstered his gun, breathing hard, his eyes finding Clara. She still held the rifle, her hands trembling, but her gaze was steady. In that moment, he saw not the woman once branded and cast aside, but the partner he had always known she could be. He crossed the distance, taking her hand. "She's the only woman I need," he said. Not just to Clara, but to the whole town. And this time not a single voice rose to disagree.